And member for Vancouver-Langara.
Mr. Speaker, this government, under this Premier, needs to act on economic reconciliation with First Nations. It's a nation-to-nation relationship. This Premier knows that, and he's failing on this file. He's failing these First Nations. The Minister's answer about Cedar LNG is just another example about how this government is failing on economic reconciliation with First Nations. First Nations, Indigenous peoples, want to be full partners in the economic development of BC, including on clean and ethical LNG projects like Cedar LNG. The Musqueam Indian Band has partnered with Fortis on a project to unlock LNG as a marine fuel through the Tilbury LNG project in Delta. But just like Cedar LNG, the project has been caught in an NDP political purgatory. Despite a legislative deadline of 45 days for a decision on the Tilbury Marine Jetty, this government has remained silent, and this Premier sits there and lets that minister stand up and answer the questions. This has been a delay for over 130 days. When will the Premier provide answers and make a decision that respects the rights of First Nations to pursue economic opportunity?
Minister of Environment.
Thank you very much, Honourable Speaker. And once again, the member opposite raises an issue of a decision under the Environmental Assessment Act. As a lawyer, the member should know that I or any of my colleagues are very limited in what we can say in response to a decision that is currently before us. But what I will say is we take economic reconciliation very seriously. We take the rights of Indigenous peoples very seriously. That's why when we rewrote the Environmental Assessment Act in 2018, we put in a provision that stated if there were nations with legitimate interests who did not give consent to a project or raised concerns, that we would meet and hear from those nations. Despite the fact that Tilbury Marine Jetty is a project under the old Act, because that is our commitment in the new Act, because it is our commitment in the Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples Act, that this government brought in, that every member of this House voted for unanimously. We, my colleague, the Minister of Transportation and Infrastructure, and I, the decision makers on this project, are respecting every Indigenous nation who wants to be heard and wants to ensure that we take their points of view and their concerns seriously and into account for the decision.
Member for Vancouver-Langara, supplemental.
Mr. Speaker, nations in our province are asking for respect. And quite frankly, Mr. Speaker, that answer shows a real lack of respect for the Haisla Nation and for the Musqueam Indian Band. They are looking for the partnership to move forward with major economic development projects like Cedar LNG and Tilbury LNG. The delays and lack of support only further demonstrates, Mr. Speaker, this government's failure to move forward with economic reconciliation. Yes, I am a lawyer. I have been. But this project and these decisions have been delayed beyond the legislated timeframes of 45 days, 100 days and counting for Cedar LNG, 130 days and counting for Tilbury LNG project. It seems that this Premier is choosing his extremist base, including members of his own cabinet, over Indigenous reconciliation and economic opportunity. For instance, his Attorney General, who was a senior campaigner for the US-based Stand.Earth. She wrote a fundraising email opposing Tilbury LNG and said, quote, "This is just the beginning of our fight to expose LNG for what it truly is, another climate catastrophe," end quote. Why has this Premier chosen to side with extremists at Stand.Earth over the Haisla Nation and the Musqueam Indian Band?
Minister of Environment.
Thank you very much, Honourable Speaker. And You know, it is just regrettable that the member opposite is choosing to label anyone who disagrees with his position as an extremist. That is not how we have dialogue in this province. I'm familiar with my record, I'm familiar with my colleagues' records, and I'm proud of all of them. My colleagues and I, Honourable Speaker, are proceeding in a respectful, thorough manner to make the decisions that are before us. In making those decisions, we consider environmental impacts, we consider our commitments, we consider economic reconciliation, and we consider the Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples Act. Among the nations with whom we met on Tilbury Marine Jetty were the Musqueam.